19th of January, our first one of the new year. I've just got a couple of an etiquette note just to read out at the start of the meeting, as we do at every meeting. So please can I remind all participants that this meeting will be recorded and copy archived for future viewing. And could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If you do wish to speak, can you put your hand up so I can see you on screen, or use the raise hand or chat function, and hopefully between us, myself and the officers, we make sure we can pick everybody up then. If anyone has any difficulty hearing or being heard when addressing committee, can you let myself or the Democratic officers know, and we'll see what we can do then to help that. If you do have a webcam, try turning that off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth. So hopefully you will still be heard and we can hear. So, but hopefully let's see how we get along with that one. So welcome to all committee members. I've got some cabinet members have joined us this evening. We've got Councillor Liz Burnett and Councillor Peter King and Councillor Eddie Williams. So thank you, and officers here as well. Okay, so we'll go first on item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
None, Chair. Everyone's present.
Okay. And the second item then, which are the minutes of the meeting, which was held on the 15th of December. Are we happy to agree those minutes? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Item number 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any? No? Okay. Right, okay, we'll go into the agenda properly now. So we got some references now from Cabinet. So the first one is the Corporate Joint Committees, which is a response to Welsh Government consultation, which went to Cabinet then on 21st of December. I think, Marcus, you're going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a presentation to go with it. Okay. So I do apologise. There's going to be 2 presentations, one after the other for each of these. Okay. So I shall try and keep it relatively short if I can. So I'll just try and get the presentation up. So hang on one second. Right, bear with me. I'm hoping that you can see that. Can you see the presentation now?
Yeah.
Everyone see it? Excellent. Okay. So this is a presentation we prepared on the back of the report that went to Cabinet regarding the response that we were required to give by the 4th of January to Welsh Government's consultation on the Local Government and Elections Wales Bill. Oops, sorry. I should try and jump on. Using the mouse is not the best. There we go. So it's a substantial piece of legislation covering electoral reform, public participation, governance, performance, and regional working. The bill was introduced in 2019 and was passed by the Senate on the 18th of November and will get royal assent early in 2021. And it replaces the current improvement duty for principal council set out in the Local Government Wales Measures Bill of 2009. The bill has been designed to be more, this has come from Welsh Government, I should add, the bill has been designed to be more streamlined, flexible, sector-led, with an approach to performance, good governance and improvement. And it is the intention that councils will be proactive in covering how internal processes and procedures should change to enable more effective planning, delivery and decision making for better outcomes. So a quick summary of the bill. It has 2 main parts. The first is to reform electoral arrangements for local government. This extends the voting franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds and to foreign citizens legally resident in Wales. It enables the enabling council to choose between a first past the post or a single transferable voting system. That is in the gift of the council to choose. To change the electoral cycle for principal councils from 4 years to 5 years. Allowing non-politically restricted council staff to stand for election in their own authority but they would then have to resign if they are elected. And it removes the returning officers' fees for local elections. And it also introduces a general power of competence, I should add. It also produces so the second part of it is reforming public participation in local government. It requires a duty to encourage local people to participate in local government and to produce a strategy to that effect. There is a duty to make a petition scheme and the repeal of the community polls, which it will replace. There's a duty to broadcast certain meetings, and there is a greater flexibility around remote attendance of meetings for members. There is a reform of democratic governance and leadership. So this relates to the requirement to have a chief executive rather than a head of paid service, and that there will be specific duties for that chief executive. The appointment of assistants to cabinets, assistants to cabinet members, and allowing job sharing leaders or cabinet members. So that's a new introduction. Updating family absence provisions in line with those available to employees for cabinet members and councillors, and requiring leaders of political groups to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members working in their group. The next stage is around collaborative working, and this is the powers for councils to initiate an establishment of corporate joint committees covering any functions, and the powers for ministers to establish corporate joint committees covering 4 functions set out by the legislation, which are economic well-being, transport, strategic planning, and school improvement. Reform of the other 2009 measures, which I referred to earlier. It repeals the 2009 measure duties, replacing audit and reporting duties with self-assessment and panel assessment, brackets peer review, and reforms to audit committees, renaming as governance and audit committees, and prescribing membership and chair, brackets introducing lay members. Oops. So moving on to, before I move on, does anyone have any questions around those general principles of the what the legislation is setting out?
Does anybody have any questions at this point? No?
No.
Okay.
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 So I shall move on.
Oh. Hello. Is that Andy, is it? Is that Councillor Robertson?
No, it's Stefan.
Oh, sorry, Stefan. Sorry,
I know we're easily confused. No, I don't know whether it's appropriate to mention it now, or maybe I should come in later with this, but there were a couple of points that were raised there that such as sort of allowing people who are not politically restricted to stand in their own authority. Do you want me to raise that later rather than now? Because the only question I have is, where is this? I find this sort of thing fascinating. I don't see how this has got anything to do with economic and environmental regeneration. I don't see where the overlap is.
Chair, do you want me to come back on that?
Yes, you can do at this point, yeah.
You're quite right, Stefan. Essentially, it is that because they've amalgamated the corporate joint committees part of this legislation with the amendment to democratic services, if you like, part of it. It's included. From your point of view, if you like, it isn't relevant to this scrutiny committee. You're quite right to say that. But unfortunately, because it's all part of the same bit of legislation, we have to refer to it, essentially. Does that answer your question?
Or I could have turned up to the relevant scrutiny committee instead.
Well,
unfortunately, doing it 4 times.
Well, I know it is a bit annoying, but there we are. Yes, it is going to tomorrow's Corporate Resources Scrutiny Committee as well, because it crosses over these 2 boundaries, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Do you want to carry on, Marcus?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So the bit which is really relevant to this scrutiny committee is the corporate joint committees part, which I'm sure members are aware of. This legislation actually, in respect of economic regeneration and planning, brings in a requirement to create corporate joint committees. You'll notice in the previous bit of discussion we just had, there is also the power to create corporate joint committees about other issues, but those aren't a requirement. This is a requirement. So the bill follows extensive consultations, and you will be aware that this, for the footprint for the Vale of Glamorgan, is part of the city region footprint. So there are 10 councils which form part of the city region, and the Vale would merge with those 10 regions to form a corporate joint committee. And in Wales, as a total, just to give you an idea, there would likely to be four corporate joint committees based on the current city deal or growth footprints. Although there is support for corporate joint committees generally because of the city deal and then the city region which already exists, there is concern, and there has been concern expressed about the mandatory nature of this legislation, and that certainly has been expressed by councils across Wales to Welsh Government. But obviously the Minister wishes to push ahead, and they have, and it has, the 18th of November when the bill was passed. There have been some amendments. So one of those amendments was to clarify that economic development was essentially the economic well-being power. The inclusion of national parks in the strategic planning role of corporate joint committees, and the clarification that corporate joint committees will replace the strategic development panels, and that all corporate joint committees must produce strategic development plans. And we'll come on to that in another presentation, so just hold that thought on that particular bit. The regulations were published on the 12th of October for consultation. The closing date for the consultation was the 4th of January. And those members will note that there's an appendix attached to this report which highlights the response that was sent. And coming to the end of this presentation, if there are any further comments which the scrutiny would like to report back to Cabinet, that can be done at the end of the meeting. There were 44 questions in the consultation. These are, the Welsh Government has outlined that these are draft and would welcome input for the regulations, and that they can be shaped by the local authorities going forward. The consultation includes an overarching consultation document and draft regulation for each proposed corporate joint committee for North Wales, Mid Wales, South Wales, and South East Wales and South West Wales. In addition, a set of regulations of general application will be issued for consultation in the new year. It is envisaged these will cover existing legislation and wider statutory duties which might apply to corporate joint committees, such as sustainable development duty and Welsh language standards. The regulations to establish the corporate joint committees, the draft regulations reflect previous discussions with the Minister and Welsh Government officials and include staffing, finance and governance arrangements. These details include corporate joint committees. Although called committees, they are corporate bodies described by the Minister as part of the local government family. They are separate legal entities from their constituent councils, similar to combined authorities or fire and rescue authorities. Membership of the corporate joint committees will be made up by each leader from each council, and corporate joint committees can co-opt other members if they choose, either cabinet members or other partners. These could be voting or non-voting members. National park members must also be a member when dealing with the strategic development plan functions. Voting. It's a one member, one vote basis. However, once established, a corporate joint committee could adopt an alternative voting procedure should they wish. That would be down to the corporate joint committee. Some member authorities remain concerned that the one member, one vote is not equitable or fair given the different sizes of authorities, which could undermine accountability. And just to cut in here, some members will be aware that previously when we talked about strategic development plans, Cardiff were very concerned about one member, one vote system, given the size. It felt it was much bigger than the other authorities which make up the Cardiff City region. But currently, Cardiff City region is and the city city deal authorities operate on a one member, one vote system. Functions. Corporate joint committees will have functions over economic well-being, strategic planning, and transport. And what you'll notice there is that education has dropped out. So when I previously mentioned the start of the regulations, education had been put into this legislation. Now education is not a mandatory part of the corporate joint committee framework. Corporate joint committees can decide to put education in, but at the moment, the only mandatory parts are economic well-being or economic development, strategic planning, and transport. The economic well-being power is potentially wide-ranging and significant, but how far this will be used will be determined by the corporate joint committees themselves. Put simply, the Minister has suggested the current city growth deal strategy functions would be transferred to corporate joint committees. Essentially, the corporate joint committees would take over the role of the city region. Concurrency of functions has been a concern for some councils, as they want to ensure that local economic development function want to ensure a local economic development function for themselves as well as a regional one. And the regulations make clear this is a matter for each corporate joint committee in response to local and regional needs. And I think just to cut in at that point, if you think about how we're currently operating, we have as a council, we currently continue to operate an economic development function at the local level, while there is a much more strategic function going on at the city region level. And certainly in the medium term, we don't envisage that changing. School improvement, although the bill does not feature early priority for inclusion, school improvement, although in the bill it does not feature as an early priority for inclusion, so that's what I referred to earlier. The bill specifies that corporate joint committees will include 4 listed functions in the bill, which are existing statutory or voluntary regional functions. Corporate joint committees can voluntarily make a request to ministers to add functions to the corporate joint committee, and a future Welsh Government could also decide to add functions via future legislation. Welsh Government has established regional bodies with statutory functions outside of the corporate joint committee framework, for example, regional partnership boards, and may establish statutory regional transport authorities or regional strategic planning panels. Although the current draft regulations allow a degree of regional flexibility, the Welsh Government could constrain or prescribe corporate joint committees through funding or policy instruments. They can provide funding in support of a function via corporate joint committees, but specify that funding must be spent in certain ways or in line with Welsh Government priorities. And also, corporate joint committees can set up subcommittees to lead on specific functions and could co-opt other members onto those subcommittees. So, for example, just cutting in again here, that could include a subcommittee around economic development, or indeed around the development of a strategic development plan. Funding. Corporate joint committees set a budget each financial year to include the amounts required to exercise its functions, its reserves, and its liabilities. The draft regulations provide outline arrangements and timescales for the determination of budgets. Proposed deadlines in the draft regulations will require further exploration to ensure they align with council budget setting processes and timescales. So it's important to note that the Welsh Government envisages these as organisations with their own budgets and setting their own budgets as we do as a council. The draft regulations state that corporate joint committee members, leaders, must unanimously agree a budget, and that constituent councils must pay a proportionate amount. If there is disagreement on the proportionality of funding, ministers have powers of direction. Staffing. Corporate joint committees must appoint a chief executive, a chief finance officer, a monitoring officer, and chief governance officer. However, these could be seconded from constituent authorities, for example. However, if you take the example of the city region, currently there is already a chief operating officer for the city region. During our early discussions amongst officers, there have been differing views on whether a corporate joint committee should appoint its own statutory officers, which may be comparatively limited roles given the scale of budgets and functions, or they may be provided by constituent authorities, given potential risks of conflict, but they are potential risks of conflict of interest, responsibility, and workload. The impact assessment equates that a range between 1 day per week to 5 days per week for senior staff will be necessary for undertaking corporate joint committee duties. And it's clear that will fluctuate depending on where you are in a cycle, for example. Corporate joint committees will be accountable to their constituent councils via their leaders. Statutory decision-making powers over the specified functions will be vested in the corporate joint committees. So the specified functions being economic development, planning, transport, and therefore the leaders who make up the corporate joint committees. Should one or more leader not support a particular regional proposal, but be outvoted, the leader would be bound by the collective responsibility on the regional proposals. And they would be delivered for her authority area without her support, possibly without the support of the authority. But the authority could not withdraw from the arrangement in such circumstances, as is the case currently. So that's an important point to note. The regulations and constitutions will need to consider dispute resolution arrangements and should plan to respond to a worst case scenario where there is a disagreement or disengagement of one of the constituent leaders or councils. Regulations state that corporate joint committees must set up an overview and scrutiny committee system. Scrutiny will be essential to ensure accountability back to the authorities and wider councillors. Individual council scrutiny committees would be able to seek to scrutinise regional bodies as they do now. Okay, before I move on, there's a few more slides, but it's obviously quite long. Are there any questions around some of those points, Chair? Obviously, there's a lot to take in there, but if there are any particular questions around a couple of the issues, I'm quite happy to take them now.
Okay. Do we have any questions? I haven't got any hands up at the moment.
Happy to wait till the end as well, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Robertson, did you have something?
Yeah, it's quite a simple thing. Basically, I think this report, all the responses have gone in, haven't they? They went in 2 weeks ago. So,
yeah.
I mean, there isn't actually anything we can do tonight, which is actually going to change anything anyway, is there? I mean, is this scrutiny? This is just for noting, is it? It's just for so you can tell us what's going to happen, because you know, obviously it's not something I'm happy about anyway. I regard this as being another tier of bureaucracy. It's going to cost a lot of money. I think the managing director is quite right in a lot of his responses to point out that financing of this is going to be a major issue. I think he's quite right to point out that getting this off the ground by next autumn for the first meeting in the light of the pandemic is going to be extremely hard. I'm very unhappy about the whole thing. Basically, I regard it as another reduction in democracy. It's another layer of bureaucracy, as I said, and another layer of local government which people probably don't want. Anyway, I just thought I'd like to say all that.
Yeah, and Councillor Robertson, can I just come in? We can, one of the recommendations is that as a committee we can make extra recommendations which can be referred back to Cabinet, and that can then be sent on to Welsh Government. So we do have that opportunity to do that at the end of the presentation if we so wish. Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, my recommendation would be that you scrap it.
Okay, well we'll have a little discussion at the end of the meeting. Okay, Marcus, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and flick through the rest of this as quickly as possible. So timing, corporate joint committees must meet for the first time by the end of September 2021, and that refers back to Councillor Robertson's point about timing and the how quickly it is expected to set these up, given where we are. Draft regulations are less clear about expectations for when implementations of functions such as planning and economic well-being will come into effect. The consultation notes that some transition period will be required, and it will be for the CJC and its constituent councils to consider the transition of existing regional arrangements such as city growth deals, should they choose to bring these activities within the remit of the Corporate Joint Committee. We've got a slide here about the funding. This was in the report. This is the funding this is what Welsh Government has set out. It's not inconsiderable as referred to previously. We do have concerns about the funding, and that's been set out in the response we've already sent. And if you look at the Appendix A to this report, it does detail those concerns. I'm going to, Chair, I'm not going to go, given the comments around performance and governance, that was the Corporate Joint Committee's bit is directly relevant. This is all more of around the performance and governance setup, which is really for the Corporate Performance Committee, so Scrutiny Committee. So as long as everyone's happy, I'll stop it there. All this deals with is obviously all the changes around voting ages and that type of stuff, which isn't really for us. So unless anyone's got any objections, I'll stop the presentation there. And again, ask for any further questions and perhaps debate around what people feel, if that's okay.
Okay, is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay, so do we have any questions? Oh, so, excuse me, right, Councillor John?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, basically, this is something that's going to be fitted in when the councils didn't merge to new authorities. The Welsh Government now have brought this together, so we'll be slammed together just like the Cardiff City deal or what I was on once upon a time was Ceuta, where we met as members of each council to talk about highways and what have you. But to be honest with you, I think this will be another talking shop. And I think it's going to have huge impact on council in the long term. I think it'll have a huge impact on where we are as a council. Personally, it's all new at the moment. I'm not very keen on the idea at all. I'll be perfectly honest with you, but it's done. It's going to be done. It's going to be dusted, whatever we say. But it's a new way. The Welsh Government, another talking shop, another layer of local government, as Andy has just said. And obviously, the leader is going to have a busy time ahead. Attending these meetings, it's going to be a lot more and a lot more pressure. So personally, I think where it should start is after the local elections in 2022. It seems senseless to me to start it next September, and then maybe there's changes or people choosing not to stand again. So, I mean, you start from square one again, then next the following year. So I would have thought it'd been a better idea if they do start, it'd be a later. Anyway, that's just a comment I want to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor John. So I've got Councillor Ruba Silvanian. Ruba?
Yeah, hi. I'll go against the grain a little bit. So I'd agree with what Gwyn was saying, actually, that in some ways it would be better to see, to see this happen after the next election, because then, you are starting from, from base and moving with a sort of new operation, if you like. I take all the reading, Rob's responses to all of this, in answer to the question, he's raised all the issues around, the finance and how, in fact, it's all going to operate. And I think the danger is it could just be a talking shop or another layer of bureaucracy. But I do think we do in Wales have to work with each other in order to achieve some, like regional connections. throughout Wales, not just transport, but culturally, and all sorts of things. So I think, in principle, I think, this is a good idea, and you do have the city deal, and that's not totally ideal, but there are elements of that work. So I think in principle I do, I can see where this is going, but I also have my reservations, that have been raised. We do need to make this work, and so the detail would be really, really important. And I think Rob has highlighted some of those in his responses, but it's also important that given that this is going to happen, that we're in it all together, and we're all fours with it to make it work.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. Okay, Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, I tend to agree with some of the things that Ruba said there about connectivity in Wales, and actually making sure that there is an overall plan. But surely that's what the Assembly's for. I mean, do we really need yet another intermediate tier of local government? I'm concerned about how much consultation there's been with the general public. Is there an appetite amongst the general public? I mean, however you look at it, the managing director says, is it going to be funded by the local authorities, or is it how much is going to be funded by Welsh government? It doesn't matter which is which, because basically it's all taxpayers' money. The public are going to be paying for this in the end. It's not the local authority or the Welsh government. It's the public. Have they been consulted in depth on this?
I'm not sure. Marcus, could you answer that question on whether the public consultation?
Essentially the answer would be yes, but the consultation is one that is undertaken by a Welsh government in the same way they've consulted us. They've consulted other representative bodies, other groups, and they are the responses and the consultation and any responses you want to make are open to anyone to make on their website. That being said, how many members of the general public would be aware of it is another question. They haven't, for example, widely publicised it in papers or newspapers or in other forums. It is out there, and for example, there will be places where it is published, and I'm sure they have had individual responses from the public. But that is a matter for Welsh government. I suppose I wouldn't like to make a comment on it, but it's a very valid point.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, do we have any other comments or questions? No? Okay. Right, well, I think we've got a couple of thoughts there, because as I said, we do have the opportunity to make some recommendations or even raise our concerns then, and we can send that back to Cabinet. So I think the one thought of what I've picked up is there was a suggestion that it should start from 2022 after the local elections. Would everybody be happy for that comment to go back? Is it just around this continuity, whether you're starting with one?
100%. 100% support you, Roman.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Morgan would like to speak.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Morgan.
Oh, no, I was only putting my hand up to support that. I think the point
Right,
that Gwyn made was absolutely right. This year, with so many other things that have to be addressed, I don't see how time and money can be made available for this.
Yeah. Okay. Then I think another thought was around is about our concerns about public consultation and what opportunities have they had, the public, to actually to make their informed thoughts around this, particularly around I think there are a few concerns around adding an extra layer of governance in with local authorities and Welsh government. So it's around that public consultation. So is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Yeah, Marcus, if you want to, yeah.
Chair, yeah, I was just going to add to that one thing that is interesting is that they have, or the Welsh government have decided to merge two issues into one, which is the general issue around democracy, and then this corporate joint committee issue. So not wishing to suggest for 1 minute they wanted to do this, but you do sort of disguise the good bits, which is a lot of people are interested in the lowering of the voting age, for example, and the responsibilities on councils to be, and leaders to show prudence and what have you. So those are the good bits, but it's sort of hidden amongst the others. So just an idea I put out there for you, just to point out that they don't necessarily sit together as very good bedfellows in some respects.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. They're two totally separate entities, I think, and as you say, they've actually tried to roll it up. Councillor Morgan, did you want to come back in with anything? Or we still just left your hand up? Councillor Morgan? No, I assume he was just left it up from earlier. So I think those are our thoughts. Was there anything else? But also then, I think stressing around the importance of regional working is important, and it is the way for local authorities to go forward. And that we do actually need to be around that table and part of that. That is crucial for the Vale Council. So I think those are the thoughts that I've picked up. Is there anything else? No? Okay. Are we happy for that to go back to Cabinet with those views?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also we've actually been asked then just to note the urgency procedure around that as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Moving on to item number 5 then, which is the response to the Welsh Government consultation on the Town and Country Planning Strategic Development Plan. So I think, is this you again, Marcus, I think?
Yes, I do apologise for my voice droning on. I'm really sorry. This one will be shorter, I do promise. So here we go. I shall try and present this again. Okay, has that appeared on your screens?
Yes, has everybody got that?
Yeah.
Yep.
There.
Okay, thank you. So, so the proposals are that obviously we have this consultation around the creation of corporate joint committees, and within that is the requirement for corporate joint committees for the specific area, in this case South East Wales, to produce a strategic development plan which will essentially replace the previous requirement, which was to set up a strategic planning panel. Now, members will recall that there was a previous report around setting up a strategic planning panel and entering into the development of a strategic development plan, which went to council on the 29th of July, I was going to say last year, the year before last, I should say. That, at that time, that was agreed by council that we would progress with our constituents, the other 9 councils of the city region, to develop a strategic development plan. So this new requirement replaces that. Welsh Government have thought better of the legislation they produced first and decided to try and create new legislation around the development of strategic development plan. So originally the background to this is the Planning Wales Act 2015 set out the process for establishing SDPs. It's a regional level development plan. It sits above a council's own local development plan and below Welsh Government's National Development Framework, which again hasn't been published as yet, although is getting closer to. Welsh Government considers that SDPs allow larger than local issues to be considered, but that does include issues such as housing, employment and infrastructure, mainly which cut across local planning authority boundaries. And it allows those to be considered in a strategic and integrated way. In 2018, the 10 authorities comprising the Cardiff City region started to consider the potential for a strategic development plan. The region reached some areas of agreement, i.e. the boundary area, governance arrangements and resources to set aside to create the plan, because it's not a cheap process, a bit like the creation of corporate joint committees. And as I said, Council fully agreed this on July 2019. Due to the proposed changes to the legislation, obviously, and we were these have been in the works for some time, work on a strategic development plan stalled not long after Council agreed to progress work on a strategic development plan, and we have been waiting for these new regulations to allow that to happen. Welsh Government's intention is to establish the CJCs as soon as possible. We talk about the first meeting I think it was autumn 2021, and exercising the functions of the SDP, but also the regional development plans as well as economic development. Welsh Government's intention is to prepare SDP guidance to assist corporate joint committees on the scale and remit of strategic development plans, and the regulations will be developed to allow them to come into force. That guidance will be subject to a separate public consultation and engagement with the corporate joint committees and local planning authorities, as well as key stakeholders, before it is published. So I suppose we can read into that, just to add, that it probably won't be available before corporate joint committees are set up, if they are set up on the timescales set out in the legislation. Because that is September 2021, I suspect any guidance would come out after that, especially if they're expecting there to be a response to a consultation from a specific corporate joint committee. The regulations are less clear about expectations for when the implementations of functions such as planning would commence. So although it says that the corporate joint committee should have its first meeting by September 21, it doesn't actually say when the various functions should start to be exercised. And it does note that there will be some transition period. What I would say here is that in respect to South East Wales, we have a very mature system around the city region, and there is a cabinet already set up around that city region. So, you would expect us to transition relatively painlessly into that place. In some other parts of Wales, that's not the case. And I think that's why they've been a little bit less clear about when they expect the actual functions to start to be exercised. So in areas with an adopted SDP, an LDP will still need to be prepared. So sorry about these acronyms, it's annoying. But so in areas where you will have a strategic development plan, you will still, a constituent council will still be expected to prepare a local development plan. And the local development plans, which are prepared under an adopted strategic development plan, will be more focused in nature, dealing with local issues and policies, and identifying site-specific allocations. But they will have to be in general conformity with the adopted strategic development plan. I don't know how many of you are aware of the previous. So in my first incarnation as a planner back in the early 90s, there was a thing called a structure plan. That was set out by, the structure plan was developed by the old Glamorgan, Mid Glamorgan and South Glamorgan councils, Mid Glamorgan, West Glamorgan, South Glamorgan councils. Each one had its own structure plan. And when we produced a local plan at the Vale council level, it had to be in conformity with the structure plan. So in many ways, this is moving back to that old system. So in response to this, we've been relatively supportive of the development of SDPs. In fact, probably more supportive of the SDP in many ways than the actual development of corporate joint committees. Clearly, as a council, we've supported the preparation of an SDP as part of the city region process. It has a lot of advantages when you have a strategic plan covering a region like South East Wales. It allows us to align transport issues with economic development and other planning issues. It allows cross-regional issues, even in respect of housing, to be taken into account. So thinking back to the old local development plan and all the angst we had around our housing allocation and numbers, if you think on a more regional basis, for example, you can create a situation where perhaps more housing is located in a more appropriate location as seen regionally. Of course, you can have the situation where your neighbours try to push housing into your area as well. But it does allow for a much more of a strategic thought process to go on. The SDP regulations would mirror the key stages and preparations of the existing local development plan regulations. But I think the view we've given to Welsh Government is that they've really underestimated the complexity that this will have and the timescale that will flow. So all of the members who were involved in the local development plan process will know how long that took to get to a point where it could be adopted. If you can imagine that on a 10 times scale, I don't think the Welsh Government's assumption that 4 years is long enough is really right. So we have said that we think that their timescales around the production of a strategic development plan are wrong. So 4 years is what they've said is considered a reasonable time to develop a plan. We think that is very, very ambitious and unlikely to be right. We've said it's a naive assumption, and it doesn't reflect the reality that all councils have had in the 15 years that we've been developing LDPs. They've taken a lot longer than 4 years to develop LDPs, let alone a plan which will cover 10 council areas. So the key issues around strategy, they intend to retain this two-stage approach as set out in the current LDP, where you have a preferred strategy and a deposit plan, and then that the strategic development plan is submitted for public examination. We support that process, but we actually think that given the size of the plan, we would recommend an examination stage for the strategy and deposit plan before you get to the actual public examination. That means that you're not wasting money on, for example, strategic allocations and hubs, which are eventually thrown out. And so it just gives having a two-stage approach like that would be much more appropriate, especially given the nature of the plan, the size of the plan, and the size of the area it's covering. In terms of governance for the plan, unfortunately, it refers that to the seat corporate joint committees without giving any real guidance. So when we talk about that, we talk about one member, one vote. So at the moment, corporate joint committees are indicating they will be one member, one vote, but that does not actually directly confer that the strategic development plan system will be one member, one vote. That will be for the corporate joint committee to set up. And those members who were aware of the previous situation back in 2019, when we eventually got to a position where the council supported it, there was considerable discussion around how many seats and how many votes each council should have in the preparation of this plan. Clearly, some of our neighbours feel they are bigger than us and they should have more votes, and that situation will obviously arise again. We had got to a point back in 2019 where we thought we'd reached a good decision. That's all been thrown out now, and we have to start again. So we just point that out in this consultation. And the consultation really underestimates the amount of time that will be needed to establish working relationships between a strategic development team and local authorities. This will take time. Again, as a Cardiff City region, we're starting with a bit of an advantage because we're the only region that actually looked at doing this previously, but it's still going to be a huge issue. And Welsh Government just take the view that an SDP, a strategic development plan, is just like a local development plan but scaled up, and that's not the case. They have real regional implications in the strategic development plan, which won't necessarily be picked up by a local development plan, and those issues may take a lot longer to resolve. The statutory decision-making powers over the strategic development plan will be vested in the corporate joint committees. Accordingly, it's important that councils will have considered and endorsed any proposed regional plans before any council representative, and this will be the leader, agrees them at the corporate joint committee. That's just setting out the procedure, how that would work. So in many ways, similar to what we did previously in 2019. It is clear that any strategic development plan for the Cardiff capital region will not be adopted before most, if probably not all, councils will have developed their own new versions of their own LDP, so a version 2, replacing their LDPs or at least updating their LDPs. And those will be adopted across the region before this SDP comes into place. So that is, we feel, a really massive missed opportunity. We were quite a long way down the road back in 2019 to getting a plan in place, and that plan could have been in a much better position strategically for those councils looking to develop LDPs in the next few years. We're not going to be in that position now. And of course, a lot of councils will be focusing their attention on LDPs in the next year, including us with a review. And so it is quite likely work on an SDP will take some time to actually start to take effect. And the final thing to note there is it's really important that the SDP is not simply a stitching together of existing local development plans. The whole point of it is to have a regional emphasis and to be strategic around issues like transport and economic development, and to ensure that those issues, which are tend to be considered very locally at the moment, are considered on a much more regional basis. So again, that missed opportunity comes into play that we had, where if we'd have started the strategic development plan earlier, I think it would have been more effective. So in conclusion, these are the concerns we have raised with the Welsh Government. There are concerns over the implications for the resources in preparing an SDP, similar to the corporate joint committees. It's going to cost a lot of money. The governance for arrangements for SDPs are not clear, and that is going to cause some horse trading in the future. There are concerns about Welsh Government's expectation about timescales around how long this is going to be prepared, and we don't think they've been realistic. And we think there's been a missed opportunity with regard to preparing SDPs when we made an offer some years ago to do that. And we are going to probably find that it's going to take a lot longer to prepare a meaningful SDP now. So to conclude, that's it. I'm really sorry, my voice was obviously so boring, and I'm really, but I hope you can get something out of that. So happy to take questions on it.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. And I think, yeah, you raised that quite succinctly, and I think the response is, very, very relevant. I've got a few people indicated they wanted to speak. So yeah, I've got you down as well, Andy. Right, so the first one is Councillor Pam Drake.
Sorry, Chair, I was flicking across the screen. I pressed the wrong button. So cross me off the list.
Okay. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Gwyn John then. Right, Gwyn, you're on mute.
Once it's come back on. There we are.
There we are.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to be a really mixed batch here, I think, Marcus, because there's going to be a lot of discussion over this one with so many authorities. I think that to set it up in the short time frame that they think is just not going to work. I think I agree they've missed a chance, and quite honestly, this period of time with the authorities all piling into this, and everybody will want to take it back to their council and discuss, etc. I can see big problems, but at the same time, one member, one vote, that is so important if you're going to have equality on this corporate committee. And obviously, our friends down the road will want a few votes. So I can see a lot of fun, let's say, in that corporate committee in making these decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gwyn. Right, Councillor Andy Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I reiterate or iterate what Gwyn just said. I think there are going to be major problems over timing. I think Marcus was slightly disingenuous, if he doesn't mind me saying so, about the voting system. If it's a one area, one vote for the CJC, I can't see why it shouldn't be one area, one vote for the SDP. But I don't think it's going to work out that way. And I think the concerns that we all expressed in 2019 about the pushing of unwanted development onto particularly our area is where everybody wants to live. I think there could be problems for the Vale of Glamorgan and for areas of Monmouth, the leafy areas of Monmouth that people want to live, especially now the tolls on the bridge have gone. And I think we have to be careful with this. I don't want to sound like a NIMBY, but I think we took quite a hit with the last LDP with a number of developments that were allowed in the Vale of Glamorgan, or I see foisted upon us by the Welsh Government, but there we go. I think we have to be really careful with this one, and we have. I think it's going to happen. and I think we have to fight our corner as hard as we can and be prepared for a bit of a battle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Robertson. Marcus, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, only to just for clarity, perhaps I wasn't clear. I don't want to be seen to be disingenuous. I think we feel it is it's a missed opportunity that they haven't set out how they envisage the voting system for the SDP will work. You know, I think in an ideal world it would be one member, one vote, and I think we would have supported that. I think, you know, we know on the previous try at this that didn't happen, and we ended up horse trading. So, you know, the likelihood is because they haven't set out how this is to work, it will get to that position. But we're not supporting that. We're just saying that you know, that is what the likely scenario is, and because they haven't set it out in the legislation. So that's a missed opportunity as well, and it is a shame that they haven't done that. And we have said that in the response. So just to sort of clarify that, really.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Right, sorry, Councillor Bailey, did you want to come in? No? Right, okay. Right, obviously we do have in the report the appendices where the responses that have been sent back, but we do again have the opportunity if we want to provide any additional comments to go back to Cabinet. So I think most of the points raised have already been raised in the comments that have been set into the response that has been sent back. But is there anything additional that we would like to send back to Cabinet, or are we happy just to accept that report and endorse the comments that have been sent to Welsh Government? Yeah, we're happy with that? Okay, that's great. Right, moving on to item number 6 then, which is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to the 30th of November 2020. So I think we're going to give Marcus the rest now. I think it's over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try and be quite brief with the report. So yeah, as you say, the revenue capital monitoring at the end of November, so the first 8 months of the year. The revenue position is shown first in the report, so very similar to the position that we reported last time, which was to the end of September. So the table at the start of the report shows the projected outturn for each directorate within each department within the service, and we're still projecting an overspend of 750,000 for neighbourhood transport services, and for building services 815,000. Both of these currently we're planning to use financial reserves to fund those overspends. So the report, as previously, mentions the issues within each area, and we've talked previously about the issues in waste management at the moment. A lot of downtime in waste management, and a lot of extra costs to get rid of our recycling at the moment. As you all know, that's slowly changing to the curbside sort method, which in time will save us money. The issues then in building services are more down to COVID, and the downtime that we have due to tradesmen not being able to work as they were previously. So a lot of work we undertake is within council houses or repair work to all our council buildings, schools, etc. And obviously at the moment a lot of that work is not being undertaken, so we're still paying our staff, obviously, but they're not producing the level of work they were before because the work just isn't there. So we're currently projecting for building services alone, so building maintenance, currently projecting about a 750,000 deficit for the end of the year. However, with the current lockdown again now, that could get worse depending on obviously how long the lockdown is for. So we're projecting it could go up to 1 million, but obviously the issues are COVID related, and in a normal year, building services wouldn't normally have any issues. So so yeah, again, we're looking to fund that from reserves because it is a one-off issue. Building cleaning then, less of an issue there, because a lot of the building cleaning service is still carried on through the pandemic. Even increased through the pandemic. The only issue they've got there is the additional cost of paying our staff an additional 10% for I think it was April to July. So we paid an additional 10% to the frontline cleaning staff, and that element, 65,000, is going to be funded from reserves. For the rest of the areas within this committee is no real issue. So for regeneration and development management, they're planning on projecting being on budget at the moment. So the report then goes on to discuss capital budgets, and the capital programme is shown at Appendix 2 to the report, and the progress to the end of November. The report then highlights a few schemes where there's been changes to the budget. I'll just go through some of the bigger ones where we've had additional budget. So we've had Dinas Power Sustainable Transport. From Section 106 monies, we've had 563,000 added to the budget, which is to be split between part this year and part next year. So that is for works along Merch Road and Cardiff Road as well, sustainable transport improvements there. We've had 62,000 for Ogmore by Sea and St Bride's Major, again sustainable transport from Section 106. And we've also had just over £1 million from Welsh Government from the Circular Economy Grant, and that's all for waste management to help in their continued rollout to source separated recycling. So we've had 250,000 to buy recycling bins for flats and apartments, so like communal recycling bins. We've had 358,000 to build a reuse shop at the HWRC, the recycling centre at Atlantic Train Estate, and we've also had 500,000 for recycling sorting equipment, which will eventually go into the new transfer station at Atlantic Train Estate. So quite a lot of money there, which we've had from Welsh Government. That has to be spent by the end of the year, and we've only recently been notified of that money. So bit of pressure to spend it, but we're confident we can at least commit a lot of that money, and then hopefully Welsh Government should allow us to maybe carry it forward or claim it next year. A lot of the schemes I mentioned then are smaller schemes, or a lot of them are mentioning slippage to next year where schemes have been unable to be progressed. So that is it for me, and I'll take any questions if anyone has any. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Councillor Robertson, do you have any questions for Matthew?
Yeah, thanks for that, Matthew. Just one question. Have we got anywhere near getting an overall picture of how much the pandemic's going to cost the council in total? Just like a big round figure of what sort of damage we're looking at here.
Council-wide, no, I haven't got that figure. I mean, we've been putting in monthly claims to Welsh Government, for additional expenditure and also for loss of income as well. So things like car parks, things like that, where we had to close them down early on in the pandemic. Lost income we were allowed to claim for, and additional expenditure. So where we've employed additional staff in waste management, for example, to try and maintain social distancing, we've been allowed to claim those monies back. So I suppose it goes back to your earlier point about the taxpayer is still paying for it, whether I suppose we pay or Welsh Government refund us for it. But the majority of expenditure has been picked up by Welsh Government. So it's something I can ask and feedback as to the value of the claims, I suppose, that we've put in so far and been funded for. But it's obviously in the millions. But yeah, I can try and get that figure for you and circulate it via email.
Yeah, what I'm looking for here, Matt, is what sort of shape are we going to be coming out of this pandemic? Hopefully, with the vaccines going to start easing the situation. I mean, it must be pretty devastating amount of damage which has been done to our finances. I think it'd be good at some point to know at what level that stands.
Yeah. As I said, Welsh Government obviously covering it at the moment, and I think they've committed to covering it until the end of the financial year. But as you say, with the vaccine rolling out for the next financial year, Welsh Government could easily say, over to you now. And like you said, it'd be worth knowing, sort of the scale potentially that we could be looking at, I suppose, if they did do that. Because some of the services, such as leisure centres, things like that, they will take time to obviously get back to levels that they were before. Even with the vaccine, people will be still be worried about attending things like leisure centres and indoor activities and things like that. So I'll try and get something together and circulate that for everyone to
Thanks,
just to how
Matt.
they feel.
Thank you very much.
Okay, right. Councillor Burnett has indicated, as the Deputy Leader of the Council, to speak around this. So I think she may be able to help. Is we happy to bring Councillor Burnett in? Yeah. Okay. Liz, are you able to help us at all here?
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Just sort of very brief. Obviously, corporate performance and resources on, was it this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, they will have a greater overview. The last figures I was looking at was somewhere around 3 million in terms of losses. But I think when you actually look at the broad aim or the whole broad picture of it, this is not just extra things that we have to pay out on, such as PPE and all the other things that cost us through COVID. As Matthew has said, there's also sizable loss of income in some areas in the council. So we've put claims into Welsh Government, but not all of those have been met. IT claims that went in, they were fully funded to start off with, but there came a point when we started to get 50% back. So we've got the increases in that as well. And then on top of that, you can actually look at the situation in terms of business grants. Now, I think if the figures I saw this week, and I'll double check that, I think Wales tipped over $1 billion in terms of support for businesses. And I've actually asked what that means for us. But, we are in, I'm trying to recall now, it was many, many millions, and we will get the information and circulate that. And I think that there will be more. Councillor Robertson said about, where are we up to and coming out of it? We're not out of it. We are still very much in a pandemic. We are still very much coping with sizable costs to this council. And I think that when we start to talk about the budget, when that comes back to Cabinet and then to full council, I believe it's going back to corporate performance and resources as well. I could be mistaken. Then we will have the most up-to-date figures at that point. But you know, this is a serious position for the. I've just seen a note, yes, from Neil. It's actually in the Cabinet report that was published today. So so yeah, it's worth having a look at that. But we are very much still in the middle of a pandemic that is very costly to our residents, but also to the public purse.
Okay, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Neil, for that bit of additional information. Marcus, did you want to come in and add on to that?
Only just to add to what Liz said, Chair, thank you. I think it's 48 million is the figure for the Vale of Glamorgan.
Yeah.
Taking account in terms of grants that have been put given to businesses. That includes the first round and the second round and the third round, and includes obviously grants that are paid out to non-domestic ratepayers as well. But I think, don't take it as read, but I think the last figure I saw was 48 million, and that figure that's rising still. So just to add that in there.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it'd be very useful then if people do pick up that Cabinet report. Obviously that will give people more information, and also the fact that it's actually going to corporate resources. And as Councillor Burnett very rightly pointed out, we're by no means over. You know, we're actually still in the very deep throes of this pandemic, unfortunately. But with the rollout of the vaccine, that does give us some lights, I think, at the end of that tunnel. But obviously, this knock-on effect around the impact on finances is going to be going on for some time, I would have thought, in my personal opinion. So, right, do we have any other questions around this report? No. Okay. So, are we happy to accept this report? And obviously, I think it's worth highlighting the fact that we need just to emphasise the impact of the pandemic, or the ongoing impact of the pandemic, and the impact that does have on the budgets, and that uncertainty around that, and how this is all actually going to pan out, really. So if we're happy to do that, okay, move on to the. Okay, thank you. Move on to the last item on the agenda, which is, I think, is over to you, Gareth.
Yeah.
Which is the third quarter scrutiny decision tracking of recommendations and updated work programme schedule for 2020-2021.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I could start with decision tracking, and these are appendices A to D of the report, just to highlight some key points. So beginning with Appendix A and the initial revenue capital budget proposals. The committee's recommendations were considered by corporate performance in December, and corporate performance agreed with the committee's recommendations, and these will be considered by Cabinet in due course. If I could then jump to Appendix D and the Whitmore Bay cleansing update. Given the duration and lack of response, I suggest that perhaps it'd be better if an update report is added to the work programme in order to highlight to members if there are any ongoing concerns, given that the initial query was back in 2018. It's still on Appendix D, and the biomass plant in Barry, still no change, and Welsh Government position is that they're still reviewing whether an EIA should have been undertaken. So that's another ongoing saga there, Chair. And if I could then move to the work programme. This is attached to Appendix E. I'm just happy to take any recommendations, suggestions from the committee, Chair. So that's my part. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. With those the changes, and obviously the ongoing issues, everything has been delayed, or quite a few things have been delayed due to the pandemic. Is everybody happy to accept that report? Has anybody got any other thoughts or views or comments? No? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So we're happy to agree those amendments that you've suggested there as well, Gareth. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chair.
That's it for tonight. We've come to the end of the meeting. Thank you for everybody's attendance and thank you for everybody's input. I think we've had some good discussions there this evening. And I just leave to say thank you to the officers as well and our cabinet members for coming along. So I'd just like to say wish you all good evening and hopefully the rain will stop and we'll get some sun back soon. Okay, so thank you very much. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Bye bye all.